At my son's wedding, the moment the MC announced, "Both families please come to the stage for photos," my wife and I rose slowly from our seats, her eyes still glistening from the emotion of it all. But there, in front of more than 200 guests, my daughter-in-law stepped forward, smiled, and pressed her back down into her chair. "You should stay seated," she said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to catch every word. "We need the photos to look classy." I stood there frozen while my son quietly straightened his cufflinks and kept his gaze fixed anywhere but on us. Then I slowly reached for my phone and started doing what I should have done a long time ago. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If stories like this one speak to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. When someone wrongs you, do you confront them right away, or do you wait until you have everything in hand? There's no wrong answer. I'm just curious which way you lean. One quick note before we get into it. Some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth at the center of the story that matters, and that part is very real. I had worn that suit to 2 funerals and 1 promotion ceremony. My best, and I knew it. The night before, Vivi had pressed it herself, humming low under her breath while I sat behind the newspaper pretending to read. Her burgundy dress was laid across the bed like an offering, the one she had driven 35 minutes to find, tried on twice, and asked me about 4 times. Is it too much? Is it enough? Every time I gave her the same honest answer, she would be the most elegant woman in that room. I meant it each time I said it. I still meant it when we turned off the main road and onto the long gravel drive of Belgrove Manor, 10:45 on a Saturday morning in October. Sloane's planning documents had not oversold it. Fieldstone pillars, boxwood hedgerows, a terraced lawn that caught the autumn light like something out of a painting. The photographs attached to the contract had shown me this view once before. My name appeared on page 1, page 4, and the final authorization page. My card was on file with the venue coordinator. $183,000 paid out in scheduled installments across 8 months. Every payment landed on time. I'm not raising that number to impress anyone. I raise it because of what came immediately after. Posted at the entrance was Bert Coulson, the venue's security lead, broad through the shoulders, composed tablet held in front of him like a barrier. His smile was the rehearsed kind, the one people deploy when the news is bad and their training is good. "Good morning," he said. "Names, please." "Leonard and Vivian Mercer," I told him. "Father and mother of the groom." Bert dropped his eyes to the screen. One scroll, then another. His face gave nothing away, which was itself information. This was not his first time running this particular errand. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said, "your assignment is Section C, overflow seating, east side entrance." I didn't move. "I'm the one who signed the venue contract, Bert." "Yes, sir," he said. "You're on file as the primary payer." He eased his voice down a notch, the register people use when they're trying to sound accommodating while the answer stays no. The seating plan, he explained, came from the couple. Ms. Whitmore submitted it. Under the event management clause, you agreed to all guest experience decisions, seating included, fall to the couple and their coordinator. Premium package standard. I knew that clause. I'd put my name on it without hesitation because Colin had asked me to, and because I believed that extending trust was the same as receiving it. Vivi's fingers found my arm, barely a touch, the tips of 2 fingers, but the message was complete. "It's fine," she said quietly, and she wasn't speaking to Bert. She was already turning a warm smile toward a couple who had spotted her from across the path, lifting one hand in a small, unhurried wave. 4 decades in a classroom had built that in her, the capacity to hold her composure for any audience while something else entirely moved beneath the surface. I had admired that quality in her for years. Right then in that driveway, it made my chest tight. I was still searching for the right words when I caught the sound of footsteps on the stone path behind Bert. I looked up. Sloane was emerging from inside the venue, heading toward the main entrance. White dress naturally, hair arranged without a strand out of place, clipboard in one hand, wireless earpiece in the other. She carried herself the way she always did, like someone who had personally positioned every object in every room she was about to enter. Our eyes connected. I know they did because her stride broke by half a step and a full second passed between us. She offered a smile, sealed, practiced, the kind that ends things before they can start. Then she was gone back through the entrance, pace unbroken. No greeting, no, "We're so glad you're here." not a gesture towards the woman who had spent years raising the man she'd just married. She didn't slow by a fraction. I steered Vivi past Bert and through the entrance, through a corridor of floral arrangements that probably ran more than my first car, and on toward Section C. Our table sat close to the east side door, the service entrance, the one that banged open on a rhythm as kitchen staff moved trays in and out. The latch rattled. The draft was sharp. Looking toward the main stage from where we sat felt like peering through the wrong end of a telescope, the important things rendered small and remote. I lifted the ceremony program off the table. Cream cardstock silver lettering. Sloane's taste. Exactly. The Whitmore family occupied the first line of the acknowledgments, reappeared in the coordinator's note, earned a mention in the floral dedication, and was printed among the hosts on the back cover. The Mercer family was absent from every page. I put the program back on the table. Vivi reached over and squared it to the edge, her way of keeping her hands from having nothing to do. Then I heard him. Colin was maybe 30 feet off, stationed near the head table inside a loose circle of men I placed immediately as Clifford's circle, something in how they held themselves. My son had one hand in his jacket pocket, the other settled on Sloane's shoulder, and he was laughing with the ease of someone who had never once wondered whether he belonged. He caught my eye. For just a beat, his expression shifted. Not guilt, not remorse. Something thinner, the mild annoyance of a man who spots an inconvenience he thought he had already managed. He said something brief to the group and started across the room toward us. Vivi drew herself up in her chair. Hope. Even after everything that had already happened, still hope. Colin arrived at our table, bent slightly forward, kept his voice down. The surface of it was cordial, the way a legal brief is cordial right before it dismantles you. Dad, Mom, a quick look around to gauge the room. You made it. We did, I said. He tugged at his cuffs, a tic he'd developed somewhere in the past 5 years. Listen, I need you to keep it together today. Clifford's colleagues are here, people connected to the foundation. This day carries real weight for Sloane's family, and she has put enormous effort into every detail. Vivi said, Of course, Colin. I looked at my son and said, We're sitting in overflow. His expression didn't shift. It's just a table, Dad. It is not just a table. Do we have to get into this right now? Another drop in volume, another degree of control. I asked you to trust what Sloane built for today. She has thought through every piece of it. Clifford's people watch everything. I cannot walk into this with problems coming from our direction. Can you just... He stopped. What followed landed the way something heavy lands when it's released from a height. Can you just sit there, have your meal, and let today be what it's supposed to be? Vivi's hand stopped moving against the tablecloth. I looked at this man, the boy I had hauled to Little League, driven to every debate tournament, co-signed the lease on his first apartment, written the check for the ring, now on Sloane's finger, and I kept my mouth closed. Because there are moments when silence is the only reply that carries any weight, and this was one of them. Colin gave a single nod as though something had been settled, then turned and walked back to the head table, back to Sloane, back toward the people who were apparently the ones that counted today. Vivi studied the program. I scanned the room and found something I hadn't noticed before: a man seated 3 tables from the center. Judge Preston Holt, retired federal judge. 26 years I had known him. He was watching me with something in his expression I needed a moment to identify. Not pity, more deliberate than that, more considered. I gave him a nod. He returned it. And the thought that settled over me then, one I would return to several more times before the day was finished, was that what had just happened was not the worst item on the afternoon's schedule. It was only the opening act. The garden turned out to be the finest part of the entire property. That surprised me. The main hall was built to make an entrance, soaring ceiling chandeliers, architecture that shoulders its way into your awareness the moment you step through the door. The garden operated on a different principle entirely. It looked like something that had been allowed to become itself over a long stretch of time. Ancient oaks anchored the perimeter, their roots buckling the stone path at the points where the trees had long since decided the path was a secondary concern. Along the south boundary ran a low stone wall threaded with climbing roses that predated clearly every person currently drawing a paycheck at Belgrove Manor. The late morning light dropped through the canopy at an angle that turned everything golden before any photographer could have arranged it. Vivi had seen it too. I could tell by the way she slowed when we came through the side door, not stopping, just giving herself one extra beat with something that deserved it. She was still carrying the bouquet white roses, stems trimmed, bound with a white ribbon she had bought specifically for this day. She had arranged them at the kitchen table the morning before in the particular concentrated quiet she brought to things she cared about, and she had held them since we arrived at 10:45 without a single person remarking on them, asking about them, or acknowledging that she had made something with care and brought it to this place. I watched her hold them and sat with that thought. Hank Corbin's voice came through the PA system at the garden entrance, warm, practiced the voice of a man who had worked enough weddings to know precisely how to make an announcement sound unplanned. If we could have the immediate family gather near the garden arch for our official portrait session. This is the one for the albums, folks. Let's make it beautiful. Vivi looked at me. I offered my arm. We walked toward the garden arch together, a wrought iron structure threaded with white roses that matched the ones in Vivi's bouquet, which struck me as the kind of coincidence that isn't one. The Whitmore family was already assembling. Clifford stood with his spine straight and his expression calibrated to dignified occasion. Nadette smoothed the front of her dress with both palms. Cousins and relatives found their positions with the practiced ease of people who had been photographed together many times before. Colin was among them, placed slightly left of center, close to Sloane, one hand at the small of her back. He was laughing at something I couldn't hear, not the shape of a polite laugh, but the full, unguarded version he only used when he felt completely at home. He looked at ease in a way I hadn't seen from him in some time. He looked like a man standing exactly where he was meant to stand. He did not look in our direction. We were perhaps 30 feet away when Dex Kirby stepped forward. Dex Kirby was in his early 50s, lean and methodical, carrying the particular quiet authority that photographers acquire after years of managing large groups of people who would sooner be anywhere else. He had one camera around his neck and a slim leather portfolio in his left hand. He had been pleasant during the brief introduction at the venue walkthrough in August, efficient, organized, the kind of vendor who makes the work look effortless because the preparation was done well in advance. He stepped into our path without quite blocking it, which is a specific skill. The ability to stop someone without appearing to stop them. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm sorry to catch you here. I need a moment." I stopped. Vivi stopped beside me. Dex glanced at the portfolio in his hand, a brief, almost apologetic glance, the look of a man checking a document he wishes said something different. "My shot list for this set only covers the Whitmore family," he said. The Mercer family portraits had been moved to informal shots later in the reception. I looked at him. 40 years of professional experience had given me a reliable sense of the difference between a man delivering his own decision and a man delivering someone else's. Dex Kirby was delivering someone else's. The slight tension along his jaw, the careful passive construction of his words. We're moved authorless, belonging to. No one told me everything I needed to know about how he felt about being the one standing here saying it. "Who revised the list?" I asked. He paused. One beat the pause of a man weighing professional discretion against plain honesty. Honesty won barely. "Sloane," he said. "About 6 weeks ago, she sent through a revised brief. I was told it had been discussed with both families. I was told 2 words that absolved him of nothing and clarified everything." "She sent it in writing," I said. "Email," he said. "I have it on file." I nodded slowly. "Keep that file, Dex," I said. "Don't delete anything from this event." He looked at me with the expression of a man who has just recognized that he is standing at the edge of something considerably larger than a photography brief. He nodded once quickly and stepped aside. Vivi had not spoken through any of it. I turned to her. She was looking at the garden arch at the assembled Whitmore family at Colin, laughing in the left center position at the wrought iron and the climbing roses and the perfect morning light that had been arranged like everything else today for a specific set of people to stand in. She was still holding her bouquet. Her chin was level. Her shoulders were steady. If you didn't know her, if you hadn't spent 30 years learning the particular geography of her composure, you might have read her expression as mild, detached interest in the scene before her. But I knew her. I caught the small adjustment she made in her grip on the flower stems. Not tightening, just holding on. The distance between those 2 things is everything. "Vivi," I said quietly. "I'm all right," she said without turning to look at me, her eyes still on the arch. I didn't add anything. Some moments don't require a word. Nadette Whitmore appeared at the edge of the group and glanced our way. She had the practiced ease of a woman who had spent decades in social settings that demanded the appearance of warmth, while the actual temperature was managed by other means. She looked at us at Vivi specifically and produced the smile of someone offering something that cost them nothing. "Oh, we'll get to the other side later," she said lightly, easily, the tone of a woman making a scheduling note rather than a social choice. The other side. As though we were a separate category, an addendum, something to be reached once the main business was done. She turned back to the group without waiting for a response. Vivi looked at the ground for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back up. I stored at the phrasing, the timing, the volume pitched just high enough for nearby guests to register without clearly hearing. All of it filed, dated, placed in the mental folder that had been accumulating since 10:45 a.m. I noticed Judge Holt at the moment his granddaughter dropped to one knee beside him. She was perhaps 11 or 12, dark-haired, focused, wearing the expression of a child who has decided a task is important and intends to execute it properly. She had a small digital camera in her hands and was gesturing at it while Holt watched with the polite bewilderment of a man who had navigated federal courtrooms for 30 years but found consumer electronics genuinely baffling. She was explaining landscape orientation. He had apparently been holding the device vertically, and she was correcting this with the patient authority of someone who has had this exchange before. She repositioned his hands. He nodded. She stepped back. He aimed the camera at the garden arch to practice, and I saw the small red light appear indicating the camera was recording. He didn't know it was running. He was simply pointing the device in the general direction because his granddaughter had told him to hold it horizontally. And the general direction happened to include the garden arch, the assembled Whitmore family, and Dex Kirby, standing slightly off to the side, precisely at the spot where Vivi and I had just been intercepted and redirected. Judge Holt glanced toward us a moment later, not at the camera, but directly with his actual eyes. He raised one eyebrow, the measured, controlled expression of a man registering something without yet deciding what it means. I held his gaze for a moment. He gave a single nod, almost imperceptible, and returned his attention to his granddaughter. I looked at Colin, still in position near the arch, still in the left center spot, still at ease and fully present in a way he hadn't been in a long time. The photographer's assistant was working through the group, now small adjustments, shoulder angles, the minor corrections that make a photograph appear unposed. Colin followed each direction without shifting his gaze from the lens. He did not turn his head, not once. I thought about the drives to his soccer games, the 3 a.m. phone calls before the bar exam, the Tuesday evenings in the kitchen when Vivi made his favorite meal because he'd had a hard week and she always knew when he was having a hard week without being told. I thought about 33 years of accumulation, the specific weight of it, the things that can't be transferred or itemized or placed in any folder. And I thought about the fact that he was standing 20 feet away in a garden my money had rented for this afternoon, and he had not looked in our direction once. The camera clicked. The Whitmore family photograph was taken. Vivi's bouquet was not in it. I looked at her hand, still carrying the white roses. Fingers relaxed, now not gripping, just holding the way she carried most things quietly without making it anyone else's burden. I noted that as well. We made our way back to Section C without a word between us. The morning light was still lovely in the garden. The oak trees remained exactly what they were. The roses along the stone wall were unchanged by anything that had occurred in the last 15 minutes. But something in me had shifted. The coffee at our table when we returned had gone cold while we were away. I picked up the cup regardless. I sat down. I took in the main hall, the head table, the floral arrangements, the deliberate architecture of an afternoon that had been assembled piece by careful piece with more forethought than I'd been prepared to acknowledge. A structure reveals what it's built from. I was starting to understand the materials in this one, and I had the feeling that specific, quiet, load-bearing sensation that arrives just before a calculation resolves that the morning hadn't yet shown me everything it had planned to. The portrait session had barely finished when I went to find my son. I wasn't angry. That is what I want to be clear about even at this distance. I was not a man who moved through rooms with his jaw set and his hands balled up. 4 decades in engineering had conditioned me otherwise. When the numbers don't balance, you return to the source. You ask questions, you hear the answers out. Then you determine what to do with what you've learned. I found Colin in the side hallway off the main reception hall. A narrow corridor, pale yellow walls, a row of framed venue photographs that no one ever bothered to look at. He was checking his phone jacket, still immaculate, nothing displaced. He heard my footsteps and looked up, and something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, something closer to readiness. "Dad," he said, "Colin." I stopped about 4 feet from him, close enough to talk far enough that this was not a confrontation. "The seating, the photos, I need you to explain." He exhaled not quite a sigh more, a controlled release of pressure. The kind lawyers acquire when they need to project patience without actually having any. Dad Sloan spent over a year planning this, every piece of it. The Whitmores carry a certain image, especially with Clifford's network here today. I need you and Mom to respect that. I kept my voice level. Respect what exactly being assigned overflow seating at my own son's wedding. It's just logistics. He tucked his phone into his breast pocket. It doesn't carry any meaning. It carries everything to your mother. Something moved across his face, a flicker brief enough that I might have missed it without close attention. He knew. He had always known. That was the part that settled into my chest like something heavy. Dad. His voice dropped the way it did when he was making a point he didn't want to travel far. I need you to hear me on this. Clifford Whitmore sits on the board of an influential legal nonprofit with deep connections across Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. Do you understand what that means? I didn't answer. It's a regional body that oversees referral networks for law firms across Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. Clifford has held a seat on that board for 6 years. One word from him, one conversation at the right dinner table, and I'm on the partnership review track at my firm. 5 years I've put into this, Dad. 5 years of 80-hour weeks, missed holidays, cases I didn't sleep through. One word from Clifford Whitmore. He paused. Can you understand that just today, get through today, don't make it about you? The hallway was very quiet. I looked at my son, this man who had worn my father's watch to his law school graduation, who had called me from a payphone outside his first courthouse because his nerves wouldn't let him walk in alone, who had once wept in the front seat of my truck after his first real loss in court and told me he wasn't sure he was built for any of it. I had told him then what my own father had told me, that the people who ask that question are usually the ones who are. I had believed in him for 33 years. Sloan knows how to navigate these things, Colin said, filling the silence I'd left. She understands this world in a way neither of us does. Just trust her dad, one day. I let that sit. Then I said, you're asking me to trust the woman who put your mother in overflow seating. His mouth opened then closed. You're asking me, I continued still quietly, to trust the woman who had your mother's name taken off the family photo list 6 weeks ago without telling either of us. The woman who looked right at your mother this morning and kept walking. That's not... He stopped. Started again. It's more complicated than that, then explain the complicated part to me. He didn't. He looked down at the carpet for a moment, and I recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn at 12 when he'd broken the garage window and spent 3 days assembling an alibi before finally just admitting it. The look of someone who knows the argument is gone but hasn't decided to stop running it. I can't get into this right now, he said. I know you can't, I said. That tells me something. He straightened up, smoothed the front of his jacket, that gesture again the one I'd begun to track, and said in a voice deliberately drained of everything, I need today to go well. That's all I'm asking. Just today. Then he turned and walked back toward the main hall without another glance at me. His stride was steady. His back was straight. From behind, he looked like a man who had just won something. I stood in that hallway and didn't move for a moment. Then I noticed it, or rather the absence of it. I had expected footsteps behind me. I had expected Vivi to materialize at my shoulder the way she often did when she sensed I needed steadying. Instead, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. I turned around. She was standing just outside the hallway door, which was set slightly ajar. Her hands were clasped in front of her the way she stood when she was in someone else's classroom and didn't want to interrupt. Her face was composed. Her eyes were dry. She had heard everything. I could tell by how she was holding herself that particular stillness she adopted when she had absorbed something requiring the full force of her self-possession to contain. Not the stillness of someone who hadn't followed what was said. The stillness of someone who had followed every word and had decided again to say nothing. She was protecting him. Even now, even after what she'd just heard, she was standing on the outside of that door rather than the inside of it because she hadn't wanted to make things harder for our son. I went to her. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the quiet between us hadn't already said more precisely. She looked up at me and her eyes were steady, the steadiest things in that corridor, steadier than the walls, steadier than I felt. And she said 2 words. I'm fine. I knew that those 2 words delivered in that particular voice with that particular expression were the saddest thing I had heard all day because I had known this woman for 31 years and I understood that when Vivi said she was fine, what she meant was that she had chosen one more time to carry something alone. I took her hand. We walked back towards Section C together. I didn't look back at the hallway, but my mind stayed there working over what Colin had said, the way an engineer works over a stress calculation that won't resolve the way it should. 5 years of work, one word from Clifford, just today. I had heard the words. I had followed the logic. What I had not yet told my son, what I wasn't ready to say aloud, was that I had been assembling a list of my own, a very different kind of list, and today was beginning to feel like the day it would finally matter. We had been back at Section C for fewer than 10 minutes when Hank Corbin raised the microphone and the room went quiet. I had straightened my jacket. Vivi had smoothed the tablecloth. Neither of us had spoken about the hallway since leaving it, and I think we both understood without saying so that some conversations needed more than 15 minutes of distance before they were safe to approach. Hank Corbin had the kind of voice that made everything sound as though it were already decided. "Before we begin this extraordinary afternoon," he said, "I want to take a moment to honor the people whose vision and generosity made all of this possible." I set my hand on the water glass without lifting it. "Please join me in honoring Colonel Clifford Whitmore and Mrs. Nadette Whitmore, whose steadiness, leadership, and devotion to their daughter brought us all together in this room today." Every table broke into applause at once. Clifford pushed back from the center table and got to his feet with the measured ease of a man who had spent a career standing in front of crowds and had never once felt small doing it. One nod, restrained, precisely timed. Nadette pressed a white handkerchief to the outer corner of her eye. I put my water glass back down untouched. $183,000, 8 months. My name on 4 contracts, and Hank Corbin hadn't spent a single breath on any of it. Vivi's hand settled over mine beneath the tablecloth. No pressure, just contact. The clapping had barely died when I picked up footsteps closing on our table. Deliberate, taking their time. I raised my eyes. Clifford Whitmore was crossing the room toward us, still working the last button on his jacket, still wearing the face of a man who had just absorbed a room's worth of appreciation and found it entirely appropriate. He drew out the vacant chair across from me and dropped into it without asking the entrance of someone who has never had to wonder whether a seat was his. "Leonard," his hand came across the table. "Good to see you and Vivian here." I took it. "Clifford." He settled back comfortable, one arm slung behind him over the chair. "Remarkable ceremony. Sloan really delivered. That woman has genuine talent." "She does," I said. His smile opened up wide, no effort behind it. "These big productions, you know, there are always 100 moving pieces. Sometimes people wind up somewhere other than expected. No avoiding it." He delivered it the way you'd describe a delayed flight. A nuisance, no one responsible, it simply happened. "I trust you and Vivian are all right over here." I studied him for a moment before I answered. "We're in overflow seating Clifford." A slight tilt of the head. "Logistics, like I said. Sloan had a precise picture of how she wanted this room to look. These things occur." "They don't occur on their own," I said. "A decision gets made. A name gets put somewhere on a chart." Something behind the smile rearranged itself, though the smile itself held its position. "Leonard, this day belongs to the two of them. Let's leave it there." "That's exactly my view," I said. "So help me understand how the groom's mother got pulled from the family portrait session this morning." Vivi said my name softly. One word. Clifford came forward an inch or two, and when he spoke again, it was in the measured register that men like him reserve for conversations they intend to end. "I think you're layering meaning onto things that don't carry it. Sloan is meticulous. Everything she touches has been considered. Our family maintains certain standards. I'd expect you to appreciate that." "I do appreciate it," I said. "I also appreciate that I'm the one who funded the standards you're standing in." The smile quit entirely. 3 full seconds of silence. Clifford looked at me the way someone looks at a structure that didn't behave the way the blueprint said. It would not fury, but a recalibration, the expression of a man realizing his model had an error in it. Then Nadette was at his elbow. I hadn't tracked her crossing the room. "Clifford, darling, they're asking for you." She caught herself, took in my face, took in Vivi's, brought her gaze back to her husband. Something moved between them in the space of half a breath, a signal that had clearly been transmitted before in conversations that hadn't included us. "Of course," Clifford said on his feet, in one motion, jacket rebuttoned. "Leonard, Vivian, do enjoy the meal. Spoken the way someone says enjoy the drive, a pleasantry that has no interest in the answer." The two of them moved back toward the center of the room. I watched them go. At the table beside ours, a broad-shouldered man in a well-cut suit, someone's relation by his ease in the room, tilted toward me with a convivial expression. Quite a family, the Whitmores. You know them well. Well enough, I said. He looked satisfied and turned back to face the front. Vivi kept her eyes forward. The set of her jaw told me everything, that particular locked quality that showed up when she was carrying something that had no comfortable place to rest. He walked over here to take your measure, she said, low enough for only me. I know, I said. He wanted to gauge what you'd do with it. I know that as well. She looked at me, then steady eyes but not at rest. Something had been accumulating behind them since 10:45 that morning, and for a moment I could feel it pressing forward, about to surface. Then the phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and passed it across the table without comment. It wasn't her phone, it was mine. She'd been holding it since I'd set it down during Clifford's recognition. The message was from Donna Albright, my accountant of 11 years who wrote texts the way she filed documents. Leonard, final payment authorization package is pending. This covers after-party venue deposit release limousine service band overtime. Total $28,500. Per contract terms, your explicit sign-off as payer of record is required before vendors can proceed. Deadline 3 p.m. today. Please advise. I went through it once, then a second time. Here's what it meant when I signed the vendor contracts. Certain line items, the after-party space, the car, the extended band hours had been structured as a terminal authorization, a separate release that required my personal approval to execute. Nothing moved until I said so. Garrett Finch, my attorney, had pushed for that language when he went through the paperwork. I'd received it as a standard precaution, the kind of structural redundancy you build in when you're signing checks of that size and want a hand on the controls. Clifford had just pulled up a chair and communicated with considerable elegance that my money had underwritten a world I was not permitted to enter. I put the phone down and looked across at the center table. Clifford already back in easy conversation. Sloane circulating Colin, filling his wife's glass with the attentive care of a man who understood he was being watched and was performing accordingly. $28,500 still in my account. Still requiring exactly one thing from me. I tucked the phone into my inside pocket. No reply to Donna. Not yet. 12:30 p.m., main corridor, Belgrove Manor. After Hank Corbin wrapped his remarks, I didn't go directly back to Section C. I positioned myself at the edge of the main corridor and watched. 40 years of reading structures will do something to a person, not just blueprints, but the live behavior of materials under stress, the way a system communicates its intentions well before it acts on them. A fracture in a load-bearing element, a settlement pattern that's too regular to be random. After enough time in this work, you understand that failure is never without precedent. The signal is always present. The question is whether you've trained yourself to see it. I had. Sloane moved through the hall with the particular self-possession of water finding a course it already knows, no hesitation, no wasted motion. She paused at the central arrangement near the head table, white peonies massed precisely, ivory ribbons spaced at intervals that no florist had eyeballed, and corrected the angle of a single stem with 2 fingers. Then her gaze swept the room in a brief methodical arc, not admiring the work, confirming the positions. Every element accounted for. I had been trying to find the right word for what I'd been sensing since 10:45 that morning, since Bert Coulson had looked up from his screen and said Section C with the tone of a man reading a weather report. The word arrived now. Not carelessness, not an oversight. Design. I located Nolan Greer near the service entrance, clipboard in one hand, headset resting around his collar, working through a printed run sheet with one of the catering supervisors. When he registered me coming toward him, his expression adjusted. Not dramatically. Just enough, the quiet sharpening of someone who has known a particular conversation was coming and has decided the only move is to meet it. "Nolan," I said, "show me the seating revision." He didn't ask me to clarify. He knew. He worked through the clipboard pages with the practiced motion of someone who'd rehearsed the sequence. What he brought forward wasn't a printed document. It was handwritten on planning paper, the hall's seating zones blocked out in blue ink, Section C, circled and flagged in red. The red notation read, "Overflow Groom's Parents, approved CH." "This is a handwritten page," I said. "The change came in during the final walkthrough," Nolan said. 6 weeks out from the event. Was Colin present? Nolan went quiet. 1 second, but 1 second is a long time when the room is otherwise still. That kind of pause doesn't withhold information. It delivers it. "He was there," Nolan said. I held the page another moment. The initials sat at the bottom with the same deliberate precision that marked everything Sloan produced. No ambiguity about whose hand had written them or what they authorized. Nolan, every record from today stays intact. Seating layouts, shot lists, vendor sign-offs, any written communication, anything on paper. Nothing gets tossed. He paused. Is there something I need to know about? Professional habit, I said. I keep records. It's how I work. He nodded, and I moved off before the exchange could turn into something I wasn't ready for. The first time Sloan came to the house, Vivi had cooked dinner. 4 months into whatever Colin was calling the relationship at that point, before any ring, before any announcement. She settled into our living room the way a contractor settles into a job site taking stock, making private calculations. Her gaze went to the built-in shelving, to the entryway, its width, its proportions, to the mantel and to the photographs arranged above it. That last look lingered. Vivi was still in the kitchen when Sloan turned to me. Is the house fully paid off? I set my glass down. Not what a lovely home. Not how long have you been here? She went straight to the ledger, to the number, or more precisely to the absence of debt, the unmarked title of a property owned clean. Yes, I said. That's wonderful, she said. Real security is so rare. I cataloged the question the way I catalog everything, as a data point without a file yet to put it in. Standing in the corridor of Belgrove Manor 40 months later, the file had opened itself. From the far end of the hallway, I watched Sloan work the room. The floral arrangements were done. Now she was alongside one of the Whitmore family's guests, near the head table, a woman in a cream jacket who laughed at something Sloan said and reached out to touch her arm. The smile came easily. Shoulders relaxed, posture open, nothing rushed about her. She did not glance toward Section C. Not in the full 40 minutes I had been standing there. That was not carelessness. The same mind that had mapped ribbon intervals and sightlines had also mapped the boundaries of its own attention. Section C lay outside those boundaries because she had drawn the line. Just as the Mercer name had fallen outside Hank Corbin's prepared remarks. Just as Vivi's bouquet had fallen outside Dex Kirby's shot list. A pattern holds its shape in the dark until someone decides to shine a light on it. Colin had been at the final walkthrough. He had sat through that planning session 6 weeks prior. He had read the red ink annotation, overflow groom's parents, and let it pass without a word. He drove home afterward. He probably rang Vivi sometime that week. He would have talked about centerpieces maybe, or travel logistics, or whatever detail made the wedding feel close and real. And he had said nothing. I checked my watch. 100 p.m. Donna needed the authorization by 3 p.m. 2 hours. The $28,500 venue hold for the after-party limo service, overtime, the suite deposit. All of it waiting on a signature I hadn't given. I had been on post all morning, filing. I took one final look across the hall. Sloan had moved on, new conversation, new table, new audience, another cluster of people who would leave that afternoon, certain they had met the most gracious woman in the room. Months of construction had gone into this, maybe longer. The seating arrangements, the photographs, the printed name cards, the lines handed to the MC, every element positioned for maximum effect, visible and invisible alike. It was a well-engineered structure, I had to admit, provided you had no reason to examine the load-bearing walls. I had spent 40 years examining load-bearing walls. I slid the phone back into my pocket, authorization still pending, and went on watching. 1:15 p.m., Section C, Belgrove Manor. Clifford was still on his feet when I got back to Section C. The applause had died, but the image of him hadn't, shoulders back, jaw set, absorbing the room's tribute the way a man absorbs what he has decided is his due. The vision, grace, and generosity of Colonel Clifford Whitmore. Hank Corbin had delivered that line as though reading from a text he believed in. The room had believed it right along with him. I took my seat next to Vivi. She had been still since I left, hands resting on the table, gaze fixed on the head table, wearing the expression she kept for situations that required her to outlast something. I had watched that expression come and go across 30 years. What I was only now grasping was how many repetitions had built it. "You're thinking about the money," she said, not a question. "What I'm thinking about," I said, "is that the man standing up there accepting credit for this wedding borrowed $85,000 from me to retire a debt he had kept hidden from everyone around him." She turned, not startled. What crossed her face was slower than surprise, the look of a woman who has tracked a shadow moving in her periphery for months and has just had someone name it. A frame snapping into place. "Tell me," she said. It had been a Thursday in March. Clifford arrived at 7 with a bottle of Woodford Reserve, the good bourbon, the sort you carry through the door when you need the atmosphere generous before you make your ask. He took the chair in my study, back straight, hands calm, and delivered what he had clearly rehearsed somewhere on the drive over. Leonard, man to man, I have a temporary situation. 85,000 between fathers, between men of honor. I'll have it back by November. What kind of situation, Clifford? The kind, he said, that doesn't need details, between men who trust each other. I noted that construction. I moved the money the following week, but before the wire went through, I called Donna. She was back to me inside an hour. Leonard, this account. It's an LLC, Whitmore Consulting Group, Delaware registration, not his personal account. Document all of it, I told her. Dates, amounts, the account number, every piece. Do you want me to look into the purpose? No. Record what we have. Nothing beyond that. Clifford's handwritten note came 10 days after, grateful beyond words. A man of your character is rare. The amount was not mentioned. The reason was not mentioned. I didn't think that was accidental. What came next arrived the way these things usually do, in fragments, not from Clifford directly, but through the studied reticence of people who know more than they intend to say. And aside from an old acquaintance who had served with Clifford in the 90s. A passing reference, indirect and clipped from someone at a Veterans Association dinner in September. Underground poker circuits had threaded through Northern Virginia and the D.C. suburbs for years. Private games held together by codes of discretion and the shared fiction that a back room had no memory. Clifford had been a fixture in those rooms. A debt had accumulated, one that had to be cleared before the wedding, because the man holding it knew Clifford's calendar and knew precisely what his standing in the community was worth to him. The $85,000 had never been a loan between men of honor. It was a rope thrown to someone going under, thrown in the dark, hidden from Nadette, hidden from everyone who knew the Whitmore name, routed through an LLC designed to keep Clifford's signature at arm's length. The bourbon, the firm handshake, the man-to-man, the between-fathers, all scaffolding erected for exactly the same purpose. Sloane had erected the seating chart to put one truth in shadow, while a more flattering one held the floor. Vivi was quiet when I finished. He came into my home, she said. He sat at my table. Yes. Her eyes moved to the head table. Clifford was in the middle of a laugh now, trading something easy with a colleague beside him. The laugh of a man who has convinced himself the past cannot follow him into a well-lit room. Does Sloane know? She asked. I don't know the full extent of it, I said, but she knows which accounts carry his name and which ones don't. I think that's answer enough. Vivi held my gaze for a moment, then her eyes dropped to the tablecloth. 3 years, she said, her voice low. I've been smiling at that man for 3 years. I know. Every dinner we shared, every phone call, every speech about honor and duty and what a man's word is supposed to mean. I know, Vivi. She left it there. There was nothing left to add. My phone had not moved from my jacket pocket. Donna's message had been waiting since noon. Final payment authorization pending, $28,500. Sign-off needed before 3 p.m. Overtime limousine service. The honeymoon suite, everything required to close out the day properly for a couple who had tucked us into overflow seating and struck our name from the program. I read it through. I typed 2 words, hold it. I placed the phone face down on the table. Something in the room's composition shifted. Not relief, nothing as clean as that. Not resolution either. More like the particular change in weight that comes when a decision that has been forming for a long time finally settles into its final form. Uncertainty has a density that most people underestimate. Once you commit, the mass doesn't vanish, it just transfers. It becomes something you're carrying forward rather than something dragging you in place. Vivi's hand found mine on the table. Up at the head table, glasses were being raised again. Another toast, another choreographed moment designed to center the Whitmores in the room's attention to ensure the right names gathered the light. I watched none of it. Since 10:45 that morning I had not felt steady. Now for the first time I did. 1:30 p.m., Section C, Belgrove Manor Main Reception Hall. The name card was small, cream cardstock, silver lettering. Sloane's taste, 2 lines set between a folded napkin and a water glass no one had touched. I had gone past it twice and not once stopped to read it. The third time I stopped. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, not Mercer, not Leonard and Vivian, not even a blank left by some clerical slip. Someone had composed those words, run them through a printer, and set the card in its place with the same purposeful hand that had written overflow in red ink on Nolan Greer's seating chart. We had not been overlooked, we had been sorted. Guests of the Whitmore family, guests in a house that my money had furnished for one afternoon. I set the card back without a word. Vivi had already read it. She held the small, composed smile she kept for things she had decided weren't worth the cost of a reaction. But her right hand, resting alongside her water glass, had drawn itself into a loose fist. Not rage. Something quieter than rage and more durable. I said nothing. Neither did she. The man at the table beside us leaned my way, mid-60s tan jacket, the open face of someone who had been at the champagne since around noon. "Wonderful event," he said. "Are you with the Whitmore side?" I considered him for a moment. "Something like that," I said. He nodded and turned back to his own table, content with the answer. It was the kind of reply that closed a door without having to explain what was behind it. I had been giving variations of that reply since morning. Section C, something like that, the language of a man who was only now taking the full measure of how much of himself he had quietly agreed to erase. The first time Sloane joined us for dinner, she and Colin had been together 4 months. I saw it now with the sharpness that only hindsight allows. She had occupied our living room with the ease of an appraiser moving through a property eyes, tracking the built-in shelving, the fireplace mantel, the dimensions of the entryway, not admiring, assessing. With Vivi still in the kitchen, Sloane had turned to me and asked without introduction, "Is the house fully paid off?" Not "what a beautiful home," not "how long have you been here?" Straight to the asset column. I had said yes. She had smiled. Real security is so rare these days. I had noted the question and let it sit. Sitting now in Section C beside a name card that had erased my family from the record of this afternoon, I understood what she had been entering into her own ledger. Nadette found us at 1:45. She came from the direction of the head table, crossing the floor with the unhurried bearing of a woman who had settled on exactly what she meant to say before she ever left her chair. She stopped at the edge of our table, turned to Vivi with a look of warm, practiced surprise, and pitched her voice precisely for the surrounding tables. "Vivi, I had no idea you were seated back here." A pause, brief, calibrated, perfectly placed. "I hope it isn't too far from everything." 2 women at the next table glanced over. One of Clifford's colleagues nearby with a champagne flute looked in our direction. The words themselves were gracious. The delivery was surgical. Vivi met Nadette's gaze with the same steady smile she had worn since she read the name card. "We're fine, Nadette. Thank you for checking." "Of course," Nadette said. "Family should always be comfortable." She rested a hand briefly on Vivi's shoulder, the light fleeting touch of a woman who had long understood that the sharpest things can be done with the gentlest gestures, and moved away. The 2 women at the adjacent table traded a look. I watched them do it. I turned to Vivi. She was already smoothing her napkin, already resettling into the posture of someone who had resolved to keep going. 30 years of marriage, and I was still learning the full scale of what she absorbed in silence. That weight had been building across years of dinners and holidays and careful wordless accommodations. This was not the first time. I knew that now with the certainty of a man who should have arrived at it far sooner. The precision of Nadette's timing, the right volume, the right witnesses, the gentle hand on the shoulder was not something improvised in the moment. It was practiced, which meant there had been prior occasions, which meant Vivi had sat through earlier versions of this and smoothed her napkin afterward and said, "We're fine," before, and I had not been paying close enough attention. I reached across and covered her fist with my hand. She didn't move, but beneath my palm, her fingers gradually opened. Across the room, Colin stood at the head table, champagne flute in hand, Clifford's arm draped around his shoulder. He was laughing the kind of full, unguarded laugh that belongs to a man who believes he is precisely where he is supposed to be. Clifford said something close to his ear, and Colin laughed again, and the 2 of them turned together to face the room the way men do when they want the room to register them. He did not look toward Section C. Not once. I watched my son stand in the light my money had paid for, laughing with the man whose gambling debts my money had retired. And I thought about the planning session 6 weeks earlier, the red ink annotation, and the one beat too long before Nolan said what he said. My phone buzzed. Garrett Finch. I looked at the screen, then looked once more at Colin. I stood, touched Vivi's shoulder, and moved toward the corridor. "Garrett," I said. "Leonard," he said. "Talk to me." Garrett had always been economical. That was his method. 30 years in law practice had pared his speech down to what was necessary and nothing more. He said what needed saying, confirmed what needed confirming, and ended the call before the conversation became anything a transcript could turn against you. "You have grounds for a demand letter on the $85,000, he said. Undocumented transfer to an LLC, no written agreement, no repayment after 7 months. Virginia law supports recovery. I'll have something drafted by Monday. Good, I said. The authorization hold on the $28,500 you're within your rights as payer of record. Just keep it out of writing anything that reads like leverage. Let the contract do the work. Understood. One more thing, Garrett said. Be careful today. Don't hand anyone a reason to make you the story. I thanked him and put the phone away. I stood in the east corridor for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. The sound of the reception filtered through the closed doors. Music, the low, steady hum of 200 guests who had no reason to suspect that anything was off. I straightened my jacket and went back inside. Colin was waiting near the corridor entrance. He had placed himself at the edge of the doorway, close enough to intercept me before I reached the main floor, far enough from the nearest table that no one would catch the conversation without trying. He held his champagne flute in one hand. The other was in his pocket. His posture was easy. He had always known how to look easy when he wasn't. "Dad," he said, "can we talk for a minute?" "We can," I said. He glanced toward the main floor, then back. "I need today to go smoothly. I know the seating wasn't what you were expecting, and I know the photos were. I know it wasn't ideal. But this is my wedding day, and I need you and Mom to let it be what it is." I looked at him. He was 33 years old. He had his mother's eyes and my jaw and a quality of deliberate self-possession I had once mistaken for depth. I observed him now the way I had been observing everything since 10:45 a.m., noting positions, cataloging data, measuring the gap between what was being said and what was actually true. "What exactly would you like us to do, Colin? Just don't make it a thing. Don't bring up the seating. Don't ask questions in front of the Whitmores. Don't make Sloane feel like she did something wrong." He stopped. "I'm asking you as your son. Please." "You're asking me," I said slowly, "to make Sloane comfortable. I'm asking you not to embarrass me." His voice dropped, not a whisper, but the register a man adopts when he has decided something doesn't deserve to be said at full volume. "Not today, Dad. Not in front of these people." I didn't answer immediately. I had spent 4 decades as an engineer. That work teaches you something they can't put in any textbook: how to hold still when a structure discloses what it really is. When the fracture you suspected becomes the fracture you can see, you don't react, you measure. I measured the distance between the man standing in front of me and the boy I had driven to soccer practice, sat beside over calculus homework, kept company at 3 o'clock in the morning before the bar exam when the nerves wouldn't let him sleep. I measured it with care. I did not hear Vivi approach. I heard her voice. "Colin." One word and quiet. The particular quiet that carries further than any raised voice. Colin turned. Vivi stood 3 feet behind him, holding her bouquet, her burgundy dress catching the corridor light. She had come looking for me, I understood. She had found this instead. Something behind Colin's eyes shifted and recalculated. What you're about to hear is the moment when the full weight of what had been done, not just to me but to Vivi, finally comes into the open. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved had been quietly working against you the whole time, would you want to know all at once, or piece by piece? "Mom, I didn't see you there." "I know," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. "I've been sitting in Section C since 11 o'clock, Vivi said. "I watched Hank Corbin thank the Whitmore family for a wedding your father paid for. I stood outside the frame while Dex Kirby photographed a family portrait that didn't include us, and I read a name card that listed me as a Whitmore guest at my own son's wedding." She paused, not for emphasis, but because she was selecting her next words the way a woman selects them when she has spent 30 years understanding their weight. "I have not embarrassed you today, Colin, not once." Colin opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," she said. He closed it. "I want you to have a good marriage. I want you to have a good life. I want Sloane to be happy and for this day to be everything you intended." Her voice held steady throughout. "But I will not sit in a corner and pretend that watching your father be written out of this room, watching myself be written out of this room, is something I'm supposed to absorb quietly for your sake." Colin looked at me. I said nothing. This was not my ground to stand on. It had never been. I was the one with the contracts, the wire transfers, the demand letter taking shape in Garrett's office. But this between a mother and the son she had raised with every deliberate and careful thing she had was not mine to enter. "I love you," Vivi said. "That is not what's in question, but love doesn't mean making yourself disappear. She held his gaze for one more beat. Then she turned and walked back toward Section C, bouquet at her side. Her posture as straight as it had been at 10:45 that morning when Bert Coulson read our names from a tablet and directed us to overflow. Colin stood very still. The champagne flute remained in his hand, tilting slightly, a small thing he hadn't registered. He was watching the direction Vivi had gone with the expression of a man confronting, for the first time, the full magnitude of something he had been treating as containable. I looked at my son. I thought about the planning session 6 weeks ago, the red ink annotation, Nolan Greer's single beat of hesitation. I thought about the bourbon and the handshake in my study in March, the $85,000, routed to a Delaware LLC, the way Clifford had said, man to man between men of honor, and the way Colin had grown up watching Clifford, the way young men study the model of success they mean to become. I thought about Vivi smoothing her napkin. Your mother, I said quietly, has been carrying this sort of thing for a long time. Today is just the first time you've stood close enough to feel the full weight of it. Colin said nothing. I'm not angry at you, I said. I want you to know that. But I need you to think carefully about what you have been asking of her. I glanced at my watch, 2:30 p.m., 30 minutes before Donna's deadline expired, and $28,500 in after-party authorizations sat unsigned on my phone. I took one final look at my son, the flute still tilting, the recalculations still working behind his eyes, and I walked back toward Section C. The afternoon wasn't over, but something had given way. Not a crack this time, a fracture. And fractures, in my experience, travel only in one direction. I didn't return to Section C. Instead, I headed for the west corridor, the one running along the outer wall past the service entrance toward the side door that led out onto the parking area. It was quieter here. The catering crew used it for supply runs, and at this hour caught between the main course and dessert, it was briefly clear. I needed it to be clear. I had been an engineer for 40 years. That work teaches you something that sounds straightforward but takes most of a career to actually trust the right moment to shut a system down is before the damage becomes permanent. Not after the pipe gives, not after the load-bearing wall goes. Before. The valve exists precisely for that moment, and the only question is whether the man standing next to it has the nerve to turn it. I had been standing beside this particular valve since 10:45 a.m. I took out my phone and called Donna. She picked up on the first ring she had been expecting it. Donna, I said, the $28,500, don't release any of it. Not the venue hold, not the limo, not the band overtime, not the suite deposit, none of it. A brief pause. Understood. I'll flag it as authorization withheld by payer of record. Vendors will be notified that final sign-off is still pending. Is there a cancellation exposure on the limo? 48-hour clause, you're inside the window, so there's a partial, probably $200, maybe $250. Proceed anyway. Yes, I said. Proceed. Done, Donna said. Anything else? Not yet. I'll call when I'm out. I ended the call and stood a moment, phone in hand. The corridor was still empty. Through the exterior door came the faint crunch of gravel, a catering van repositioning in the lot. Somewhere in the hall, the band had moved into a slow number-something orchestral, the kind of music selected to make a room feel like a cherished memory while it's still unfolding. I pulled up the limo company and my contacts. I had booked them in July, a 5-hour contract for the bride and groom pickup at Belgrove Manor at 4:30 p.m., drop-off at the hotel. I had paid the deposit myself. My name was on the contract. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. This is Leonard Mercer, booking reference October 11th, Belgrove Manor pickup. I need to cancel the service. Mr. Mercer, that's a same-day cancellation. Per your contract, there's a partial fee. I understand the fee, I said. Please cancel and send written confirmation to my email on file. A pause while he typed. Confirmed, Mr. Mercer. Cancellation processed. You'll have an email within the hour. Thank you, I said and ended the call. The hotel required a bit more time. The reservation carried both my name and Colin's, a joint booking I had made in August for the honeymoon suite in Amalfi. 3 nights. I had offered it as a wedding gift and covered the deposit in full. The hotel's cancellation line held me for 4 minutes before a coordinator came on. Mr. Mercer, we do have a 48-hour cancellation policy on suite reservations. I'm aware, I said. I'd like to cancel the reservation and forfeit the deposit. Please send written confirmation to my email. She hesitated. Sir, I do need to note that this is a joint reservation. The deposit is in my name, I said. I'm the guarantor of record. Please process the cancellation. Another pause. Then, yes, sir. Processing that now. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, I said. Thank you for your time. I returned the phone to my jacket pocket. The corridor remained quiet. A single fluorescent light above the service door hummed at a pitch just below conscious awareness, the kind you only notice when everything else has gone still. I stood there a moment and took account. Authorization withheld $28,500. Limo service canceled. Amalfi suite canceled. Garrett's demand letter in progress. The seating chart bearing Sloane's initials was in Nolan Greer's files. Judge Holt had footage he didn't yet know was relevant. Donna had documentation stretching back to March. I had not raised my voice once. I had not caused a scene, had not confronted anyone at their table, had not given a single person in that hall grounds to point at Leonard Mercer and call him the problem. I had simply exercised the rights of a man whose name appeared on every contract in this building, quietly, methodically, and without apology. Garrett's voice came back to me. Don't give anyone a reason to make you the story. I hadn't. I straightened my jacket and moved back toward the main hall. The corridor door opened onto the reception floor near the edge of the Whitmore family's cluster of tables. I stepped through and paused to let my eyes adjust to the light. The warm gold pouring from the chandeliers, the white of the floral arrangements, the pale sweep of 200 guests in formal dress. I found Sloane without searching for her. She was at the head table, standing slightly apart from those around her, a champagne flute in hand, and her attention directed for the first time since I had arrived at Belgrove Manor that morning toward Section C, toward me. She was not in conversation with anyone. She was simply watching. Her expression matched the one she had worn while adjusting the floral arrangement at noon, the practiced neutrality of a woman taking inventory of a variable that has drifted outside its expected range. She had not looked at Section C all day. She was looking now. I held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then I walked back to my wife. Vivi was where I had left her, hands resting on the table, the small white bouquet beside her water glass. She looked up when I took my seat. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She read my face the way she had been reading it for 30 years, recognizing the particular stillness that meant something quiet and consequential had been done, and that an explanation would come when the moment was right. She gave a single nod and returned her attention to the room. Across the floor, Sloane had turned away, but she would be thinking. I understood how planners worked. I had been one in my own field for 4 decades. When a variable shifts without warning, you don't let it pass. You run the numbers. You check your exposure. You start making calls. She would be making calls very soon. I checked my watch. 3:01 p.m. The deadline had passed. Sloane found me before I had a chance to find her. I had expected it. After the moment at the doorway, her gaze finally crossing to Section C, that inventory look, the 2 seconds of held attention, I had known she would move. Planners always move when something falls out of position. The instinct to correct, to contain, to restore the arrangement to what was intended is too deeply wired to override. She came from the direction of the head table, threading through the reception crowd with the same fluid efficiency she had shown all morning. She drew up beside me near the north corridor entrance, close enough for a private exchange, far enough from the nearest table to preserve the look of something casual. "Leonard," she said, "do you have a moment?" "I do," I said. She produced the same thin smile she had offered at the entrance that morning when she moved past Vivi and me without a word of greeting. Composed, practiced, but something in it was different now. A slight tightening around the eyes. The sharpened alertness of a woman whose calculations are returning numbers she doesn't like. "I wanted to check in about the after-party authorization," she said. "Donna reached out to Nolan about an hour ago. Something about a hold on the final payment." "That's right," I said. She waited for me to go on. I didn't. "Is there a problem with the vendors?" she asked. "No problem with the vendors," I said. Another pause. She adjusted her grip on the champagne flute, a small shift barely perceptible, but I had been watching hands all day. "Leonard, if there's a concern about the event, about anything that happened today, I would genuinely like the chance to address it. This is Colin's wedding. I want everyone to feel Sloane," I said. She stopped. "I'm not going to discuss the authorization here." I kept my voice level, my expression composed. "If there are matters to resolve, they'll move through the proper channels. You'll hear from my attorney next week." The word attorney landed exactly as I'd meant it to, not as a threat but as a fact. Structural, load-bearing, immovable. The smile didn't vanish, but it recalculated. "I see," she said. "Is Clifford aware?" "Clifford," I said, is welcome to contact Garrett Finch at his earliest convenience. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she gave a single nod, the nod of a woman entering into her files, something she had not anticipated filing today, and moved back toward the reception floor. I watched her go. Then I walked to the terrace. The north terrace was deserted at this hour. The ceremony had shifted entirely inside, and the terrace chairs had been cleared away after the cocktail hour, which was now long past. It was a wide stone platform looking out over the estate's lower garden oak trees at the perimeter, the sky beginning its slow turn toward the gold of late afternoon. I stood at the railing and called Garrett. He picked up on the first ring. "She made contact," I said. "Expected," Garrett said. "How did she play it?" "Controlled. Asked about the authorization, mentioned Clifford. I told her to call your office." "Good. That's exactly right." I heard him shifting papers. "I've drafted the demand letter, 85,000 plus applicable interest and recoverable fees, addressed to Clifford Whitmore personally with a copy notation to Whitmore Consulting Group, LLC. Send it Monday morning," I said. "Confirmed." A pause. "Leonard, there's something else." I waited. "I've been running background on Riverside Trust, the name you flagged from Clifford's phone call. It's not a bank. It's a private lending entity registered in Maryland, the kind of structure that handles short-term, high-interest obligations outside conventional channels. I found a second wire transfer in the account records Donna sent over. 14,000 transferred in January, 2 months before the 85. I was quiet for a moment. Same LLC. Same LLC, different routing number. The January transfer has no corresponding note either. If I'm reading this correctly, the $85,000 in March wasn't the opening move. It may have been a settlement of something that had already been running. The oak trees at the edge of the terrace shifted in a slow wind. Inside the hall, the band had started again, something upbeat now, the kind of song that announces the reception has reached its celebratory second half. "How long do you need?" I said. 2 more days. I want to trace the January routing before we send anything. If there's a pattern, I want it documented before Clifford has a chance to restructure." I looked through the terrace doors. Inside, through the glass, I could make out the head table. Clifford was on his feet again, another toast, another moment in the light, the rehearsed humility of a man who had built his reputation on a foundation serviced with other people's money. Beside him, Colin raised his glass. "Take them," I said. "I'll have the full picture by Wednesday," Garrett said. "Leonard, this is going to be a clean case. Everything Donna documented holds up. You did this right." "I had a good accountant," I said. Garrett almost smiled. I could hear it in the silence. "Get through the rest of the afternoon. I'll be in touch." I ended the call and stood at the railing another moment. 14,000 in January, $85,000 in March. Riverside Trust, a private lending entity operating outside conventional channels serviced with money routed through an LLC carrying a name designed to pass as a legitimate business. Clifford Whitmore had not borrowed money once between fathers and men of honor. He had been assembling a debt structure, and he had used my trust as one of its load-bearing elements. I put the phone away and looked at the sky. The afternoon light was shifting. The gold was thickening, the shadows stretching long across the lower garden. In 2 hours, this wedding would be done. The guests would go. The vendors would pack and leave. Belgrove Manor would revert to whatever it was when it wasn't hosting other people's occasions. But the documents would remain. They always did. The hall looked different at 4 o'clock. The chandeliers had been dialed to their evening setting warm gold in place of the bright ceremonial wash of the morning, and the shadows along the room's edges had deepened into something almost intimate. The floral arrangements at the head table had dropped a few petals. The white linens bore the soft record of a long afternoon. A wine ring here, a refolded napkin there, the particular undoing of a room that had been performing elegance for 6 hours and was beginning to show the effort. I stood at the edge of the main floor and looked at all of it, not with anger, not anymore. With the particular clarity that settles in after a decision has been fully made and fully carried out, the quiet that follows when the valve has been turned and the system has begun its invisible change. I was standing there when Preston Holt found me. He came from the direction of the central tables, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man in his mid-70s who had learned to husband his momentum. Dark suit, no tie, a glass of water in his left hand. His granddaughter, maybe 12 years old, a compact digital camera slung around her neck, had been 2 paces behind him before she veered off toward a table of younger guests. "Leonard," he said. "Preston," I said. "I wasn't certain you'd find an opening. I've been looking for one." He came to a stop at my side and surveyed the room with the same calibrated attention I remembered from 3 decades back when we had occupied opposite ends of a municipal contract dispute, and he had methodically taken apart the other side's position, with the unhurried patience of a man who knew that steadiness applied long enough always defeats noise. "I want you to know I was there this morning. At the entrance." I looked at him. 10:45, he said. The man with the tablet. The overflow call. No flourish, no editorial weight. The flat, clean delivery of a judge entering a finding into the record. I was standing 20 feet away. I had a clear view of it. "I appreciate you saying so, Preston." "I'm not saying it so you'll appreciate it." He lifted the water glass and drank slowly. "I'm saying it because we've known each other 30 years and I recognized what I was watching, and because my granddaughter had just been walking me through the video function on my phone at the time." I went still. She was giving him a tutorial, Holt went on with the trace of dry precision that had always characterized him. It turned out he'd been holding the phone in portrait when the correct form was landscape. She had been mid-correction. The camera had been active throughout. What was in frame, the entry area, the man at the tablet, you and Vivian being routed to the side, the whole exchange. He paused. "No audio-visual only, but the geometry is unambiguous, the positions are clear, the direction of movement is clear, the moment Vivi turned toward the side entrance is very clear." I took a moment before responding. "Preston, I'm not interested in putting you in an uncomfortable position." "You're not," he said. "I'm an old man whose granddaughter has to teach him how his phone works. I have no stake in any of this. But the footage exists, and if it turns out to be useful to something you're working through properly, I'm willing to share it as a personal record." He met my eyes directly. "I don't have the full picture of what today has been for you, but I know what I watched, and I know how to tell the difference between a logistical matter and a deliberate act." I held his gaze. "Thank you," I said. One nod. The kind men of his era use for things that have been understood and don't require anything further. We stood side by side in comfortable quiet. 2 men watchful in a room that believed itself unobserved. The music had eased into something slower, and a handful of couples had drifted onto the dance floor near the head table. Colin and Sloane were there, her hand resting on his shoulder, his settled at her waist, the 2 of them moving with the fluency of people whose afternoon was going exactly as they intended. I watched my son out there. I thought about Garrett's 2 days. I thought about the January wire and the March wire, the Delaware LLC Riverside Trust, and the careful scaffolding of a man who had tended his reputation so thoroughly that it never occurred to him to check what it was resting on. I was still thinking when Clifford materialized. He'd come from the far end of the room, threading between tables at the relaxed pace of a man beginning his final tour of the evening, a glass of bourbon in hand. Near the window, he had stopped with a cluster of guests. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the room around him, the forward lean of people being addressed, the posture of an audience absorbing something that had been framed as wisdom. The word family surfaced twice in his gestures. Then he turned and his eyes found Preston Holt standing beside me. Something small shifted. A fractional course correction, a step that trimmed itself, a line of movement that quietly bent away. His gaze went from Holt to me to Holt in roughly the time it takes to blink and at nearly the same speed. The bourbon glass stopped moving in his hand for exactly 1 beat. Then he redirected himself toward the far wall at a pace that was just noticeably quicker than before. Holt watched the whole thing. "He placed me," Holt said, his voice low and even. "We were both on a veterans committee 3 years ago, a funding review Northern Virginia chapter." A pause with the weight of something being left unsaid. He gave quite a refined speech that day. The subject was integrity in public life. I offered nothing. "He knows I retain faces," Holt said. The music continued. The dance floor grew more crowded. Across the room, Clifford had embedded himself with another group, shoulders already resettled, chin up, reconstructing the ease of a man who had decided the best countermove to being seen is to be seen somewhere else immediately. His glass, I noted, stayed empty. I went back to Vivi and gave her everything. Not a digest, not a considered edit calibrated to spare her the harder parts. All of it. I settled into the chair beside her at the Section C table. The cream name card still in its place between us. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore guessed in silver script right where I'd set it down 4 hours before, and I walked her through it chronologically. The 3 calls. Donna's confirmation that the $28,500 hold had been formally entered as authorization withheld by payer of record. The limo canceled, partial fee absorbed. The bridal suite 3 nights deposit forfeited. Garrett's demand letter, Clifford's name at the top, going out Monday morning. The second transfer, $14,000 in January, 2 months before the $85,000. Same LLC, different routing number, same blank where documentation should be. Riverside Trust, the Maryland entity that existed outside normal lending structures and handled the category of obligation a man accrues when he confuses his good name with a line of credit. And then Preston Holt, the video, the landscape correction, the granddaughter's tutorial, 30 seconds of unintended footage covering the entrance area and everything that happened there. The Veterans Committee 3 years back. The moment Clifford's glass went motionless in his hand as he crossed the room and calculated in 2 seconds exactly what he was standing in front of. Vivi did not interrupt once. She had always had the steadier ear between us. I spoke the way I construct things in sequence, cause preceding effect, each piece leading cleanly to the next, because that is how I was trained, and because ambiguity costs and precision holds. She received it the way she spent 30 years receiving things from children in a classroom with complete attention, no urgency to fill the intervals between sentences with her own words. Hands folded on the table, bouquet beside the water glass, the white roses giving slightly after 6 hours in a heated room. When I finished, she held the silence for a long stretch. Somewhere at the far end of the hall, the band was still at it, something slow. The chandelier light had softened further, deepening toward amber. Up at the head table, Clifford worked another circle of guests. His gestures easy, his bearing undisturbed, a man operating on information that had not yet arrived. Vivi looked at the name card, then at me. "Are we leaving?" "Yes," I said. She lifted the bouquet from the table. "Then let's go quietly," she said. We left the way we'd entered, straight through the main corridor, through the reception floor, past the service entrance. The route was deliberate. Not the back passage, not a side door, not the service exit I'd slipped through twice that afternoon to make calls away from the crowd. We went down the middle of the room, moving at the pace of two people with a destination and no interest in explaining it. A few gazes tracked us. A woman in a blue dress at the bar looked up briefly from her conversation. One of Clifford's associates, the tall one in the gray suit who had been angled towards Sloan at the head table during the luncheon, followed our path for 3 seconds and then rejoined his exchange. A couple of younger guests near the dance floor registered our movement without quite knowing what they were registering. Nobody stopped us. Nobody said our names. Nobody asked where we were headed or expected us back. 35 years of professional life had taught me something about the weight a room assigns to presence the signed contract, the approved transfer, the number in an account that authorizes everything downstream. What that same experience had taught me just as clearly is that the most powerful act available to the man those rooms depend on is to walk out of one without seeking clearance, without offering explanation, without the glance back over the shoulder that signals he might be persuaded to stay. I kept my eyes forward. Vivi didn't. At the main entrance, the wide doorway where Bert Coulson had planted himself at 10:45 with his tablet, where the day had introduced itself with the words Section C overflow seating, where Vivi had put on her small and practiced smile and walked with me toward the side table without once voicing what it cost her, she stopped and turned. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. Enough to be intentional. Not so long that anyone not already paying attention would catch it. I gave her the time she needed. What she was doing made complete sense to me, and the last thing it called for was a practical word or a reassuring hand on the shoulder. Grief had nothing to do with it. She hadn't wavered, hadn't reconsidered. This was Vivi Mercer running the same ritual she ran every June, the one where she stood at the threshold of her classroom and held the room in her eyes one last time, fixing every detail in place, because she had always held to the belief that the experiences you carry deserve accurate keeping, not the soft blur that distance applies over time. She took in the chandeliers, the white peonies massed at the head table, a few petals now loose on the linen below. The dance floor where Colin and Sloan turned slowly through the amber light, his hand resting at her waist, hers on his shoulder, both of them exactly where they had meant to be. The printed program on the registration table near the entrance. Whitmore 4 times across the front page. Mercer, nowhere. She let her eyes move over all of it. Then she turned and walked out. The lot was still. The afternoon light had stretched long and amber the oak trees at the edge, throwing their shadows far across the gravel. The catering vans had shifted positions for the evening service. A breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, and underneath it, the thin sweetness rising from the vineyard beyond the estate wall. That scent, California, in the fall afternoon going golden, would be fastened to this day for the rest of our lives. I already suspected it then. I brought her around to the passenger side and pulled the door open. She stopped before stepping in, one hand braced on the frame, her gaze dropping to the bouquet she was holding. White roses arranged by her own hands the morning before at the kitchen table, the stems cut clean and tied with a white ribbon she had gone out and bought for this exact day. She had carried them since 10:45 through every hour of that afternoon, and not one person had taken a picture of them or asked about them or noted that she had built something with care and carried it into a room that had determined well in advance that she was not going to be seen. "Leonard," she said. "Yes." Her eyes went back to the roses and stayed there a beat longer than they came to me. "I want you to know that I'm not sad," she said. "Not the way you might think. I'm something else." "What are you—" She gave the question the full weight it was owed, no pivot, no quick answer to close the subject, the deliberate pause of a woman who had spent 30 years learning that the honest answer always required that extra moment of reaching. "Finished," she said. "I'm finished with this particular thing." She got in. I eased the door shut and went around to my side. I was barely in the seat when my phone buzzed inside my jacket. I pulled it out. Sloan. A call, not a text. The timing told me everything. She had tracked our exit from the entrance, held off until we were through the main doorway, then dialed. Every second of it was calculated. She had known the moment we rose from our seats. She had been counting. I stared at the screen. The red ink in the margin came back to me. The shot list reworked 6 weeks before. The name card in gold script. The whole architecture of grace and vision and generosity. An afternoon built by a family on ground that belonged to someone else. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I turned the key. Gravel crunched under the tires as we cleared the space. The iron gate of the estate moved past on both sides. Ahead, 2 open lanes cut through the amber wine country and ran toward the highway. Vivi kept the bouquet in her lap, her eyes forward. Mine were forward too. Behind us, Belgrove Manor fell back in the mirror. The fieldstone pillars, the oak trees, the warm glow filling the tall windows where 200 guests were bringing an afternoon to its close. An afternoon they would call beautiful when they talked about it later. The phone stayed quiet, but only for now. I understood it would come again. And when it did, I would not be the same man who had walked through that entrance at 10:45 with his name ready hoping to be placed. That man was already gone. The night before at 8 o'clock I had dialed Clifford. He picked up on the third ring, 2 rings of deliberation first, which told me he had clocked my name on the screen and taken a moment to decide how to play it. His voice came out even the way it always did, the well-worn register of a man who had made composure his primary instrument across decades of rooms where it paid. "Leonard," he said. "Hell of a day." "I'd like to meet tomorrow morning," I said. 9 o'clock, the Hilton on King Street lobby. A pause. "Is everything all right?" "There's some paperwork I'd like to walk through with you," I said. "It won't take long." A second pause, this one longer. The silence of a man confronting an accounting he had been hoping to postpone. "I'll be there," he said. The Hilton lobby on a Sunday at 9 holds a particular kind of quiet, the weekend guests not yet gone, the weekday travelers not yet arrived. A handful of people nursing coffee at the window, a family staged near the elevator with their luggage, the whole space suspended in that gap between one chapter and the next. I was there 10 minutes ahead of time. I picked a table against the far wall, clear view of the entrance out of the main pedestrian flow, close enough to the lobby bar that ambient noise would absorb our voices without putting us within range of the front desk. Clifford came through the door at exactly 9. Civilian clothes, khaki trousers, a navy blazer, no tie. He wore the look he always wore, measured, unhurried, the bearing of a man whom strangers would never suspect of owing anyone an explanation. He picked me out from across the lobby and came over without breaking stride. No extended hand. I didn't get up. He took the chair across from me, and his eyes went straight to the manila folder sitting on the table. "Leonard," he said. "Clifford," I said. "Glad you came." I opened it. 3 pages inside, printed and laid out by Donna with the exactness I had relied on through 11 years of working beside her. Numbers in columns, dates, unambiguous amounts, rendered in bold. "January 14th, I said, rotating the first page to face him. "A wire transfer of $14,000 out of a joint account I share with my wife. Recipient Whitmore Consulting Group, LLC, registered in Delaware. No invoice attached, no written agreement, no stated purpose." Clifford studied the page. He offered nothing. "March 7th, I said, moving to the second sheet. "A wire transfer of $85,000. Same source account, same destination, same total absence of any documentation. You showed up at my house with a bottle of Woodford Reserve and asked for it man to man. I gave it to you. I let that rest. The third page is a summary my accountant prepared. Combined principal $99,000. Statutory interest under Virginia law calculated from the transfer dates. The figure as of this morning is at the bottom. Clifford looked at it. His jaw had gone tight. Both hands lay flat on the table, the cultivated stillness of someone putting real effort into not flinching. "Leonard," he said at last, voice dropped low. "This was a contribution family between men who... A contribution doesn't go to an LLC. Clifford." He stopped. I kept my tone flat. No heat behind it, no edge, no theater, just figures read aloud the way you read a load calculation to a client asking why the math lands where it does. "A contribution goes to a person," I said, "to an account that carries a name. It comes with a straight conversation about its purpose. What you gave me was a story on her family, a temporary situation. What you gave my accountant was a Delaware LLC with no invoice on record and no repayment across 7 months. I shut the folder and rested both hands across the cover. "My attorney sends a formal demand letter Monday morning. I want you to know that before it arrives." Nadette walked in at 9:18. She came from the elevator bank, which meant Clifford had told her his destination, and she had come down when she was ready on her schedule, not his. Put together, composed handbag hooked over one arm. She read the table in a single look. The folder Clifford's expression and lowered herself into a chair without anyone asking her to. Silence held for a moment. Then Nadette said, "How much?" Clifford's eyes moved to her. "Nadette, how much, Clifford?" The voice of a woman who has held a specific number at arm's length for a long time and has chosen this morning as the day she takes hold of it. Not fury, something that runs at a lower and steadier temperature than fury. The precise state of a woman who has traced a shape in the dark for months and has just been given a lamp to see it by. The same thing I had watched cross Vivi's face 2 days ago in Section C. I turned the third page toward her. She looked at it. Her face didn't crumble. No color rose in her cheeks. It simply went still, the way a structure goes still when the final load drops into place and the full weight of the thing becomes visible all at once. $99,000 moved through an LLC, no paperwork, no repayment. She laid the page back on the table. Clifford was watching her. Not me, not the folder, Nadette. And in that look, in the particular quality of fear that surfaced behind his eyes as he turned to his wife, I found something I hadn't anticipated encountering at this table on a Sunday morning. Not fear of a lawsuit, not fear of a demand letter, a routing number, a Veterans Committee hearing. Something older and simpler than any of that, the fear belonging to a man who has concealed something from the one person whose regard for him has always mattered most. Clifford Whitmore was more afraid of his wife than he was of my attorney. I picked up my coffee and stayed quiet. The lobby continued around us, unhurried, indifferent, uninterested. The folder rested on the table between us like a fact that had been biding its time, waiting for the right morning to make itself undeniable. The doorbell rang at 2:00 in the afternoon. I was in the study working through the notes Donna had sent that morning, the complete documentation package she had assembled for Garrett, clean chronological, every transfer dated and sourced. Vivi was in the kitchen. I heard the bell, heard her footsteps stop, and then heard the specific kind of silence that tells you the person at the door is someone who wasn't expected. I came out of the study. Colin was in the doorway. No Sloan, no overnight bag, no pretense of a scheduled visit. Just my son in clothes he had probably been wearing since the night before. Dark jacket, open collar, the particular undone quality of a man whose sleep had not gone the way he'd planned. He looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me in a long time, without the calculation, without the managed distance he had been keeping between us for well before the wedding. "Can I come in?" he said. "Yes," I said. He took the armchair by the window, the one he had claimed as his since he was 10 years old. The one with the scuffed fabric on the right armrest where he used to hook his elbow doing homework. Now he sat with his hands folded between his knees, eyes on the floor for a beat before they came up to me. I took the chair across from him and waited. He didn't ask about Sloan, he didn't ask about the wedding. He said, "Clifford called me this morning." "I expected he would," I said. "He told me you met at the Hilton." A pause. "He didn't tell me what was in the folder." "No," I said. "He wouldn't." Colin held my gaze. "Tell me." So I told him, laid it out the same way I had laid it out for Clifford. January the transfer, March the transfer, the LLC routing, Donna's documentation, Garrett's demand letter going out Monday morning. I delivered it without editorial, no weight of accusation pressing down on any of it, just the sequence of events in the order they had occurred, the way facts present when they have been properly kept. Colin listened without breaking in. When I finished, he sat with it for a long moment. Then he said, "Did Mom know about the money the whole time?" "No," I said. "I told her yesterday, in Section C." He took that in. I watched it move through him, not fast, not with any drama, but with the slow and thorough quality of something working its way into a load-bearing place. The fact that Vivi had sat beside me through Hank Corbin's remarks in the name card and Nadette's second approach, and all of it without knowing about the $99,000. That she had carried that entire afternoon on its own terms without the additional weight of a financial betrayal running beneath it, and had still arrived at the parking lot, white roses in hand, saying, "I'm finished." Colin put his face in his hands for a moment. Not performance, not theater. The brief private gesture of a man recalibrating something he had badly miscalculated. Vivi came in from the kitchen. She hadn't known he was there. I could see it in the way she stopped short in the doorway, dish towel in her hands, taking in her son in the armchair with the expression of a woman who had readied herself for one kind of afternoon and been handed an entirely different one. She looked at Colin. She looked at me. Colin stood up. He didn't move toward her right away. He stood in front of that armchair and looked at his mother across the length of the room. This woman who had arranged white roses on the kitchen counter the morning before, who had carried them for 6 hours without a single photograph taken, who had stood outside the frame and held a small, composed smile and said, "We're fine, Nadette," and then, "I'm finished," and nothing in between that wasn't absolutely necessary. "Mom," he said, "I saw your bouquet this morning, the white roses." Vivi looked at him. "I drove past the house on the way over," he said. "I could see them through the kitchen window. You must have put them in a glass when you got home." She said nothing. "I stood there for a while," Colin said, "before I rang the bell." He stopped. "I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that you made those for yesterday, that you carried them the whole day, and nobody—" He stopped, started again. "Nobody asked about them. Not once." Vivi was still for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and sat down on the sofa, not beside him, not reaching for him, just choosing the same room, the same light, the closeness that carried its own meaning without requiring anything more. Colin settled back into the armchair. The three of us sat quietly together for the first time since before the wedding. Then Colin said something I hadn't asked for and hadn't seen coming. "I saw the seating chart before the wedding." I looked at him. "Not the final version," he said. "A draft. 6 weeks out at the planning session, I saw where Sloan had placed you and Mom, and I told myself it was her domain, her decision, her family's day to organize." He looked down at his hands. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than speaking up. The room held that for a moment. I didn't respond right away. I let it be what it was, not a verdict, not an absolution, just a fact. Finally in the room where it belonged, said by the only one who could have said it. Vivi looked at her son. She didn't speak, but her eyes didn't move away either. Colin raised his gaze to mine. "What happens now, Dad?" I looked at Vivi, the dish towel still in her hands, the kitchen light still burning behind her. 30 years of mornings and dinners and report cards and late-night phone calls, and the particular patience of a woman who had held consistently and without demand that the people she loved were worth staying for. Then I looked back at my son. "That," I said, "depends entirely on you." Garrett Finch's office hadn't changed in the 12 years I'd been his client. The same mahogany desk, the same wall of case files behind him, the same framed photograph of the Blue Ridge in winter on the wall to his left. Garrett was the kind of attorney who understood that consistency signals competence, that a client who has been sitting across from the same desk for a decade arrives with a reserve of trust already banked, and that reserve is worth more than any redecorating scheme. He had coffee waiting when I walked in. "Sit down," he said. "I have the full picture." He opened the file. Donna's documentation was there, printed, tabbed, organized with the clean precision I had come to count on through 11 years of working alongside her. Garrett walked me through it the way he walked through everything. No drama, no editorial. The unadorned clarity of a man presenting facts to a client who was paying him for exactly that. January 14th, $14,000 wire transfer from the joint account to Hargrove Consulting Group LLC, Delaware registration. No invoice, no written agreement, no stated purpose. March 7th, $85,000, same source account, same destination, same total absence of documentation. Combined principal $99,000. statutory interest accrued under Virginia law from the respective transfer dates. Riverside Trust, Garrett said, turning to the third tab. I've been able to confirm the entity. Maryland registered private lender. The kind of entity that runs outside the normal banking infrastructure, short-term, high-interest collateral-based arrangements that leave no trace in standard credit reports. It caters to a particular type of client. Gambling debts, I said. That's part of it, Garrett said, choosing his words. I can't formally document the link between Riverside Trust and illegal poker operations across Northern Virginia and the D.C. suburbs, but the routing pattern lines up with what Donna uncovered: 2 outflows from your account into an LLC, each followed within 72 hours by a matching transfer out of that same LLC into a Riverside Trust account. I reviewed the routing records. Clifford had run my money through as a conduit. The LLC was never where the funds were headed. It was cover a buffer inserted between my account and obligations that couldn't under any circumstances bear the name Colonel Clifford Whitmore. The demand letter went out Monday morning, I said. 8:45 a.m., Garrett confirmed. Directed to Clifford Whitmore personally with copy notation to the LLC. Certified mail plus electronic delivery. Virginia law gives him 14 days to respond. He paused. Which brings me to the second item. He put the file down. Preston Holt phoned this office yesterday afternoon. I hadn't pointed Holt toward Garrett. I'd passed Garrett's name to him at the reception, one mention framed as if this becomes relevant to something you decide to pursue through the right channels. Holt had filed it and moved when he was ready on his own reasoning. The way a man who spent years on the federal bench moves when he has concluded that a matter belongs to him. He turned over the footage on his own initiative, Garrett said. Visual only, no audio, roughly 40 seconds. The entrance of Belgrove Manor, 10:45 a.m., October 11th. Bert Coulson steering you and Vivian toward Section C. The tablet is in frame. What happens is plain. He held my gaze over his reading glasses. As Holt put it, it leaves no room for interpretation. Did he say anything beyond that? Garrett tilted back in his chair. He noted that Clifford Whitmore is up for the Veterans Alliance Leadership Award. The ceremony is in November. Holt holds a seat on the selection committee for the Northern Virginia chapter. A pause. He did not indicate he planned to take any specific action. His exact words were that he wanted me to know he had the complete picture. I held that for a moment. There is a kind of pressure that needs no active delivery. Its power is simply in existing in the subject, knowing that someone with standing has their eyes open, and that the act of watching is itself a force. Clifford didn't need Holt to dial his number. He didn't need a formal filing a hearing, a piece of letterhead. All he needed was to understand that Preston Holt, a man who had sat beside him on that Veterans Committee 3 years back, who retained faces who had been standing 20 feet from that entrance at 10:45 on Saturday morning, while a camera ran without his knowledge, had now walked into a room with my attorney carrying the word aware. That was enough. Clifford knows Holt is on that committee, I said. He does, Garrett said. They've been in contact as recently as September on the nomination process. I lifted my coffee. The Blue Ridge photograph on Garrett's wall caught January light gray slopes, trees stripped bare, the unsparing clarity of a view that keeps nothing back. I had always found something settling in that image. It showed exactly what it was and nothing more. 14 days on the demand letter, I said. 14 days, Garrett said. Standard window. If he comes to the table, we work out repayment terms. If he doesn't, he will, I said. Garrett came close to smiling, the same near expression he'd produced when I first mentioned having a good accountant. The look of an attorney who has seen enough cases turn on forces outside any courtroom to know when the outcome is already written. He glanced at the file, then back at me. Leonard, he said. Clifford's attorney rang this office this morning. I set the cup down. 2 hours after the letter went, Garrett said. What was the message? Garrett placed both hands flat on the desk. The measured stillness of a man who has been holding something back for 3 days and has now arrived at the moment. They want to talk. I was at my desk in the study when the phone went off. Vivi was outside. I could see her moving through the raised garden beds she had been putting in since September, shears in hand, the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who has made a quiet decision about where her energy belongs. She had been drawn out there more since Sunday. I understood the reason and left her to it. I checked the screen. Sloan Mercer. She had changed her contact name sometime after the wedding. I registered that without attaching anything to it and picked up. Sloan, I said. Leonard. The voice was exactly as I'd expected, smooth calibrated, the professional register of someone who had spent 10 years in public relations and knew that how a conversation opens determines everything that follows. Thank you for answering. I know this has been a difficult week. There's a lot to sort through, and I was hoping we might be able to talk. Go ahead, I said. She moved into it the way a prepared person does, forward momentum dressed as spontaneity. What I think would benefit everyone is a structured dialogue. A neutral mediator, maybe. There are things that haven't been heard on either side, and I'd genuinely like the chance to work through what happened at the wedding together as a family. She let that land. I didn't pick it up. She kept going. I recognize there are concerns about the seating and about how the photography was handled, and I'll own the fact that those decisions weren't explained the way they should have been. If Vivi felt... Sloan, I said. She stopped. Who authorized the seating revision? A silence, short but there. The event management clause put guest experience decisions in our hands. Who signed it? I said. The handwritten change on Nolan Greer's chart, red ink, section C, overflow groom's parents. Who put those words on that page and initialed it? A longer silence. Who went into Dex Kirby's shot list 6 weeks out and took the Mercer family out of the official portrait sequence and placed them in informal shots that were never actually scheduled? Nothing. I have the chart, I said. I have the initials. I have a written statement from Nolan placing that revision at the final walkthrough with Colin present when it went in. I heard something shift in her breathing, a small controlled adjustment, the sound of a person recalculating. Leonard, she said, and the register had moved, still composed, but carrying the specific temperature of someone switching lanes. I think this started badly. The seating was a practical call, not a statement. I never wanted Vivi to feel... The name card read, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore Guest, I said. My wife has carried the name Mercer for 30 years. Someone sat at a keyboard, typed those words, sent them to a printer, and set the result on a table in section C. That is not a practical call. Silence. I waited. When she came back, the mediation angle was gone. In its place was something more stripped down, not quite honesty, but the functional frankness of a person who has discovered that what she built is more exposed than she'd measured. Whatever ended up being recorded at the entrance, she said, it was a miscommunication between Bert and the version of the guest list he was working from. The tablet had... I stopped tracking the words. I counted to 3. She had handed me something she hadn't meant to hand me, not the explanation itself. I had seen that coming, the deflection about an outdated list and a guard following bad information. What she'd given me was the assumption beneath it, whatever ended up being recorded. She knew the footage existed. She'd known before she dialed, which meant Nolan Greer standing there when Judge Holt showed his granddaughter the camera function, or having heard it from someone nearby, had carried that detail back to Sloan sometime between Saturday afternoon and now. She had been working around it, building her mediation pitch on top of it. I let her finish the sentence about Bert and the guest list. Then I said, from this point on, my attorney handles all communication. I'd recommend you have Clifford do the same. A pause. Leonard, I really think if we could just... Sloan, I said. Have Clifford do the same. I ended the call. I set the phone on the desk and turned to the window. Vivi was still out in the garden. She had moved to the far bed, the one running along the fence line where the late-season herbs grew, working with the unhurried precision she brought to anything that asked for patience. She hadn't heard the call. She had no idea it had occurred. I turned over what Sloan had handed me without meaning to in the space of 4 minutes. Sure, she knew the footage existed. That was the first thing. She had been sitting on that knowledge since the weekend, which meant her mediation pitch had never been a genuine reaching out. It was containment, an attempt to pull the key parties into a managed conversation before the footage could become something Garrett might use formally. The second thing was more telling. Clifford's attorney had called Garrett on Monday morning 2 hours after the demand letter landed, a legal response structured and professional. Sloan had called me on Thursday afternoon, 4 days after that, carrying a mediation proposal that made no mention of the demand letter and no reference to Clifford's attorney. They weren't working from the same playbook. Clifford was moving through legal channels the way a man moves when his lawyer has given him clear direction. Sloan was coming through personal channels the way a woman moves when she has concluded that her interests and her father-in-law's no longer run parallel. Something had broken loose inside the Whitmore household since Sunday morning. Since the Hilton lobby and the folder and Nadette's face as she read the number on that third page. I picked up my phone and called Garrett. Sloan called, I said. I know, Garrett said. She rang this office about 20 minutes ago as well. I didn't answer. A pause. Leonard, they're no longer running a unified strategy. Clifford's side wants to settle. Sloane's side wants to control the story. Those are different objectives, and they've just opened the space between them for us. I looked at Vivi through the glass. The late afternoon light caught her at an amber slant, the same quality of light that had stretched across the oak trees at Belgrove Manor when we rolled out of that parking lot 4 days ago. "What do we do with that space?" I said. "We wait," Garrett said. 48 hours. Let them discover they're headed in opposite directions. Then we talk to Clifford's attorney on our schedule. 48 hours, I said. "Trust the structure," Garrett said. "You laid the foundation correctly. Now let it carry the weight." Garrett called at 11. I was at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and a newspaper that had been sitting in front of me unread. Vivi had gone to the market, the Saturday practice she had kept for 20 years. The same place, the same list, the same unhurried hours she had always held as her own. The house carried the specific quiet of a space with only one person in it, a person who has been expecting a call without openly admitting it. I answered before the second ring. "Clifford's attorney reached out this morning," Garrett said. "They're prepared to settle." I set the coffee down. "Walk me through it," I said. He did methodically, without embellishment in the sequence that mattered. Clifford would repay the full principal of $99,000. Statutory interest under Virginia law calculated from the respective transfer dates of January 14th and March 7th, bringing the total to $116,200. Wire transfer to the account Donna had designated to be completed within 7 business days of a signed agreement. No admission of wrongdoing in the settlement language. Garrett had anticipated that, and I had told him I didn't need it. His attorney pushed for a mutual non-disparagement clause, Garrett said. I told them we'd consider it. My recommendation is to accept it binds them as much as it binds you, and you have no need for a public statement. You never did. Agreed, I said. One more thing, Garrett said. His attorney asked whether there were any conditions beyond the financial terms. I had been carrying this question since Monday, since the moment I sat across from Clifford at the Hilton and watched Nadette read that third page, and understood that the figure on it would settle into her differently than any demand letter Garrett could draft. Yes, I said. One condition, non-financial. Garrett waited. A handwritten letter from Clifford to Vivi. Not to me, to Vivi specifically, acknowledging that he borrowed money under false pretenses and that he understands he violated the trust of this family. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to go anywhere public. No one needs to see it but her, but it must exist. It must be in his hand, and it must reach her before the wire transfer clears. A pause. His attorney will resist that, Garrett said. I know, I said. Hold the line. Garrett nearly smiled. I heard it in the silence before he answered. I'll call you within the hour, he said. He rang back in 40 minutes. 20 minutes of back and forth, he said. Clifford's attorney called it unusual. I said my client's position was firm. They put me on hold. When they came back, Clifford had agreed. I looked through the kitchen window at the garden. The late October light was thin and exact, the kind that removes flattery from everything it touches. No warmth to blur the outlines, no shadow to lend depth that isn't earned. Garrett, I said. Thank you. You did the work, he said. I just delivered the letters. Colin called it 100. The quality of his voice stopped me at first, not because something was wrong with it, but because something was right with it in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. The practiced distance had been set aside. What remained beneath it was something less constructed, something from before. Dad, he said, I wrote Mom a letter. I stayed quiet for a moment. I started it Sunday night, he said. After I left the house, rewrote it 4 times. I put it in your mailbox this morning. A pause. I didn't want to call first. I knew if I called ahead, I'd find a reason not to go through with it. Has she gotten it? I said. It's still in the box, he said. I drove past about an hour ago. It was there. Another pause, shorter. I don't know if she'll read it. She'll read it, I said. I put everything in it, Colin said. The planning session, the seating chart, the things I kept telling myself so I wouldn't have to say anything out loud, all of it. His voice carried something I hadn't heard from him in years. Not exactly guilt, something more useful than guilt. Accountability spoken plainly with no protective layer of qualification underneath it. I'm not asking her to answer. I just needed her to have it. I understand, I said. Dad, a long pause. I'm sorry. I looked toward the window, the garden, the thin October light falling across the beds. I know, I said. Work on it. Work. Vivi returned from the market at 2. She set the bags on the counter, spotted the envelope I had retrieved from the mailbox and left on the kitchen table, and stood still over it for a moment before touching it. She knew Colin's handwriting on the front. She lifted it and looked across at me. "Give me a little while," she said. "Take all you need," I said. I went to the study. I made no effort to listen. I checked the clock twice and stopped myself both times. What was inside that letter belonged to Vivi and her son. It had nothing to do with routing records or Delaware registrations or demand letters or the widening distance between two people pulling toward different attorneys. It was older than any of that. It belonged to them. 20 minutes later, Vivi appeared in the study doorway, the letter folded once in both hands. She looked at me with the particular expression she wears when she has arrived somewhere, not impulsive, not reactive, but settled. The expression of a woman who has run the calculation all the way through and is ready to say what it came to. "I think I'd like to go somewhere," she said. "Just the two of us, somewhere quiet." "Where?" I said. She considered it for a moment. "Somewhere we've never had to account for ourselves," she said. "Somewhere that doesn't have a version of us yet." The town had no version of us. That was the first thing I noticed when we pulled in. The particular freedom of a place that holds no prior image of you, no accumulated story of who you are supposed to be when you step through a door. The woman at the inn addressed us as Mr. and Mrs. Mercer from the reservation, and the name arrived clean stripped of everything it had been carrying since October. Just a name. Ours. We had been there 4 days. The mornings were cold in the way Maine coastal mornings are cold. Not the sharp, dry bite of inland cold, but something denser, salt-heavy air that worked its way through your jacket within the first minute outside and didn't leave. We had fallen into the habit of carrying our coffee to the small wooden deck that looked out over the water wrapped in the thick wool blankets the inn kept for guests, watching the light climb slowly over the ocean, the way it does when there is nothing to rush it. No landmark on that horizon to tell you where you were. Vivi held her cup in both hands. I held mine. The waves arrived at intervals that had no connection to anything we had left behind in Virginia. The wire transfer had cleared on October 27th. Garrett had called to confirm $116,200 exactly as agreed received in the account Donna had designated. He said Clifford's attorney had been professional throughout. He said the non-disparagement agreement had been signed by all parties. Then, with the particular economy of a man who recognizes when a matter is closed, he said, "It's done, Leonard. Well done." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat in the study for a while looking at a photograph I had been turning over in my mind since I first noticed it on the wall of Garrett's office back in October. I had been thinking even longer than that about what the money meant now that it had come back. Not what it represented. I had understood that since March. What I was working out was what the right shape of it was going forward. The answer didn't take long to find. I called Donna the following morning. "The full amount," I said, $116,200. "I want to establish a scholarship fund, Civil Engineering, George Mason University." A pause. "It will be called the Vivian and Leonard Mercer Scholarship, named for my father, who taught me what the word structure actually means." Donna was quiet for a moment. "I'll have the paperwork started by end of week," she said. "Thank you, Donna," I said, "for everything this year." Another pause, the brief professional pause of a woman who has done this work long enough to understand that certain thank yous carry more weight than their surface suggests. "It was straightforward," she said. "You gave me clean data. Colin called on a Tuesday in November. Not a long call, not a heavy one. He phoned the way you phone when there's nothing particular to report and no specific item on the agenda, when the call itself is what matters. The simple act of keeping a line open that has been strained and hasn't fully healed yet, but hasn't gone to ground either. He asked about the trip. I told him we had been thinking about the coast. He said that sounded right. He asked about Vivi. I said she was well. He said he was glad. Before he hung up, he said, "Dad, I'm working on it." I knew what he meant. I had told him to work on it in October, and he was checking in the way he had always checked in on things that mattered to him since he was old enough to grasp that some efforts deserve acknowledgement even before they are finished. "I know you are," I said. "Keep going." I didn't ask about Sloan. He didn't mention her. Some things move at their own pace, and that pace was not mine to set. On our third morning at the coast, Vivi walked down to the water. I watched her from the deck. She went at the unhurried pace she used on uneven ground, careful, deliberate collar up against the wind. She made her way to the place where the waves reached their highest point on the sand, and stopped there, right at the line the ocean could touch. She crouched and picked up a stone, small, flat, pale gray, the kind the coast produces by the millions through the patient, indifferent work of water on rock across time. She turned it once in her palm, then straightened and looked out at the water. She didn't throw it. She slipped it into her jacket pocket and stood there a while, waves running in around her boots, the gray ocean running to the gray horizon, the wind moving through her hair. I didn't go down. Some moments are not yours to walk into. I sat on that deck with my cooling coffee and thought about what I understood now that I hadn't understood in January or March, or on the morning I drove to Belgrove Manor in a suit I had pressed the night before because I wanted to look right for my son's wedding. I understood that structures reveal themselves under load, that the fault you couldn't see in the blueprint becomes visible the first time the weight is applied, and that this is not a failure of the structure. It is information. It is the building telling you what it is actually made of. I understood that the most important thing I had done all year was not the demand letter, not the authorization hold, not the 3 phone calls from the west corridor of a Napa Valley estate. The most important thing I had done was stay level, stay precise, not perform anger when I felt it, not perform calm when I didn't, not allow the gap between what was true and what was convenient to quietly close. Vivi was coming back up the beach now. The stone was in her pocket. Her hands were free. I didn't know how much she had forgiven Colin. I didn't know if forgiven was even the right word for where she was headed. Forgiveness belongs to the person doing it. It is not a transaction, not a ledger entry, not something a third party can document or verify or take any part of the credit for. Whatever Vivi had set down or held onto on that beach was hers. It had always been hers. She came up the steps and sat down beside me. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The ocean moved. The light shifted. Somewhere further down the coast, invisible in the morning haze, there was a town that carried other people's names and other people's histories, occupied the way all places are with the ordinary, serious work of going on. We sat there a long time. We didn't need to say anything. And that silence, the one that required no explanation, the morning that asked nothing of us. The plain fact of 2 people sitting together on the far side of a hard year, hands around their cups, the water in front of them, that was enough. We sat on that deck for a long time, Vivi and I with the main, cold settled into our jackets, and the ocean doing what oceans do, moving forward without asking permission. That is where this story ends, not with a courtroom, not with a scene, with 2 cups of cold coffee and the quiet that comes after a hard year finally closes. I believe God has a way of making sure that what is built on a false foundation doesn't stand forever. It may take months. It may cost you things you didn't expect to lose sleep, trust the version of your family you thought you had. But the accounting always arrives. What this year taught me is that the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to become smaller in response to being diminished. Vivi never did. I tried not to. That steadiness, that refusal to perform what you don't feel turned out to be the only tool that mattered. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Document everything, not out of suspicion, but out of respect for the truth. When someone shows you who they are, through the small decisions, the seating chart, the name card, the shot list, believe what you see. If you lend money to family, put it in writing. Love doesn't make the terms clearer. It makes them harder to enforce when things go wrong. And if your child is silent when they should have spoken, give them the chance to find their way back. Colin did. It was not easy for him. It shouldn't have been. These are the kinds of father stories and grandpa revenge stories I want to keep sharing with you here on Grandpa's Revenge, because they remind us that dignity is something you protect quietly over time, one careful decision at a time. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed, there are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you on the next one. Take good care.